Hello everyone, I wanted to make an introduction before moving on to the video. The channel's interactions are a little low, so I'm asking you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and state your opinion in the comments. Thank you very much in advance. In the quaint town of Maplewood, where picket fences lined the streets and children played without a care, there was one house that always seemed shrouded in mystery. It was the old Reynolds place, a sprawling, Victorian home that had been vacant for years, its windows boarded up and its yard overgrown with weeds. Most townsfolk avoided it, attributing superstitions to its eerie presence. But everything changed when the Sanders family moved in. Tom and Lisa Sanders were excited about their new home. With their two children, Emma and Jake, they were eager to embrace the quiet life that Maplewood offered. The first night, they settled into their home, marveling at its creaky charm. The air was thick with nostalgia, a blend of dust and forgotten stories. It felt like the perfect place to start anew. However, their excitement dimmed when they first encountered the neighbors, the Reynolds. They were an elderly couple, Eleanor and Harold, who rarely ventured out but were known for their odd behavior. The Sanders often saw them staring out from their windows, their faces expressionless, as if they were watching every move made by the newcomers. Initially, Tom brushed off the couple's peculiarities. "They're just old," he told Lisa. "Let's give them time." But Lisa felt a chill every time she caught their gaze. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow observing them. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, the Sanders family decided to have a barbecue in their backyard. Laughter and the scent of grilled burgers filled the air, but a sense of unease crept in when they noticed the Reynolds standing in their yard, mere feet away. They hadn't heard them approach. "Good evening," Tom called out, forcing a smile. The couple didn't respond, their eyes fixed on the sizzling grill. Emma and Jake, oblivious to the tension, continued playing. "Can we help you?" Lisa asked, her voice shaky. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice raspy. "Just admiring your festivities." There was a strange undertone to her words, as if she were savoring something sinister. "Come join us," Tom offered, but Eleanor shook her head, and Harold remained silent. They turned and walked away, their figures disappearing into the shadows of their own yard. As days turned into weeks, the Sanders began to notice more oddities. Late at night, strange noises would emanate from the Reynolds house, slow, rhythmic thumping followed by muffled whispers. Tom tried to convince himself it was just the couple's eccentricities, but Lisa was increasingly anxious. One afternoon, while Jake was playing outside, he noticed the Reynolds' backyard was different. It was as if the weeds had grown taller overnight, the grass thick and wild, concealing something beneath. He approached the fence, squinting to see better, but his gaze was met with a darkness that felt alive, pulsing with an unsettling energy. "Jake, come back here," Lisa called from the porch. He reluctantly retreated, but the image of that mysterious yard stayed with him. The Sanders decided to host a neighborhood barbecue to break the ice, hoping to connect with their neighbors. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they invited everyone, including the Reynolds. To their surprise, Eleanor and Harold accepted, appearing at the edge of the yard just as the festivities began. As the night wore on, the Sanders made small talk, attempting to draw the couple out. Harold spoke very little, but Eleanor was animated, sharing bizarre tales of the town's history, tales that felt more like warnings than stories. She spoke of disappearances, of strange happenings, of the very house they lived in. "Once, a family disappeared from that home, just like the last," she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "No one even remembers their names." The atmosphere grew heavy, laughter dying down as the other neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. The children began to sense the tension and retreated to the swings, whispering amongst themselves. Feeling the weight of Eleanor's words, Lisa tried to change the subject. "What a lovely garden you have," she complimented, attempting to ease the growing discomfort. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, her smile widening. "We work hard to keep it thriving." Her gaze flicked toward the darkened expanse of their yard, where shadows seemed to dance just beyond the light. As the evening ended, the Sanders family felt a strange mix of unease and pity for the old couple. They had expected to find friendly neighbors but instead encountered an unsettling energy that lingered long after the Reynolds left. Over the next few days, things took a darker turn. Tom received an anonymous note slipped under his door. It read, "Stay away from the Reynolds. They take more than they give." He felt a chill run down his spine. Who would warn them, and why? One night, unable to sleep, Lisa woke to a strange sound outside. It was a low hum, rhythmic and eerie. She crept to the window and looked out, heart pounding. In the Reynolds' yard, she saw the couple standing together, their faces turned to the sky, as if in a trance. The moonlight illuminated their forms, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to writhe against the ground. Panic surged within her. She turned away from the window and stumbled back to bed, her mind racing with fear and confusion. What were they doing out there? The next morning, the children seemed different, quiet, withdrawn. Emma, usually so bubbly, had a far-off look in her eyes. When Lisa asked her what was wrong, Emma simply replied, "The nice old lady told me secrets." A shiver ran through Lisa. She knew she needed to protect her family. Days turned into weeks, and the Sanders became more isolated. They tried to maintain normalcy, but the oppressive atmosphere hung over them like a storm cloud. One evening, Tom decided to confront the Reynolds directly, determined to understand the strange hold they seemed to have over his family. He knocked on their door, and after a moment, it creaked open. Harold stood there, eyes vacant. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. "I'd like to talk," Tom replied, forcing himself to sound calm. "I'm concerned about my family." Harold's gaze pierced through him, and for a moment, Tom felt as if he were being weighed and measured. "They're fine. They're with us now." "What do you mean?" Tom asked, dread pooling in his stomach. "Children are so much better when they embrace the truth," Harold said cryptically. "You'll see soon enough." Tom left, shaken. That night, he and Lisa decided to pack their things. They couldn't stay in a place where their children were being drawn into something dark. But just as they began to load the car, they heard a loud crash from the backyard. They rushed outside to find the children standing at the edge of the Reynolds property, mesmerized by something glowing in the overgrown weeds. "Emma, Jake, come back," Lisa shouted, fear gripping her heart, but the children didn't move. They seemed entranced, eyes wide, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow. Tom grabbed Lisa's hand, and they rushed toward them, desperation fueling their steps. As they approached, they saw a dark, twisting shape emerging from the ground, a mass of vines and roots coiling together, pulsating with an unnatural light. The air crackled with energy, and Tom felt a pull, a compulsion to step closer. But Lisa yanked him back, fear flashing in her eyes. "Emma, Jake, come here," she cried, voice trembling. Finally, the children snapped out of their trance, turning to their parents with confusion. "What's happening?" Emma asked, her voice small. Before Tom could answer, Eleanor appeared behind them, her face devoid of emotion. "They're not ready to leave. They belong here now," she said, her voice as cold as the grave. In that moment, everything clicked: the disappearances, the darkness, the whispers. The couple wasn't just eccentric. They were predators, feeding off the innocence of children, trapping them in a web of despair. "Run," Tom shouted, grabbing Emma and Jake and sprinting toward their home. The world felt distorted, the air thickening with dread as the shadows stretched behind them. They reached the door, slamming it shut just as a loud crash echoed from the yard. The children were crying, clinging to their parents as fear coursed through the house. "We have to leave now," Lisa urged, panic in her voice. They gathered their belongings, their hearts racing, every second feeling like an eternity. But just as they were about to escape, they heard a soft knock on the door. Lisa double quotes, it was Eleanor, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can't leave. You belong to us now." Ignoring the voice, Tom opened the door to find nothing but darkness outside. The yard felt alive, vibrating with energy, as if it were beckoning them to return. They backed away, fear flooding their senses. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the house began to shake. The walls seemed to close in, and whispers echoed in their ears, calling their names. The children screamed, clinging to their parents, who fought to hold onto reality. With a surge of adrenaline, Tom grabbed a flashlight and shattered a nearby window, breaking the glass with a primal scream. "We have to go." He shoved the children out first, then climbed through after them. They landed in the cool grass, hearts racing, and bolted down the street. Behind them, the whispers grew louder, the darkness stretching like claws toward them. They ran, not stopping until they reached the edge of town, gasping for breath. As they turned back, they saw the Reynolds house illuminated in the moonlight, the figures of Eleanor and Harold standing at the window, watching them with hollow smiles. It was a reminder of the terror they had narrowly escaped, but the true horror was yet to come. Weeks later, they found themselves in a new town, far from Maplewood. They tried to settle in, but the memories haunted them, dark shadows lurking at the edges of their vision, whispers filling their ears. Emma and Jake still spoke of the nice old lady and her secrets, words that chilled their parents to the bone. And every so often, when the wind howled just right, they could almost hear the whispers calling them back. The pull of the Reynolds yard remained, an unseen thread binding them to that dark place, a reminder that some neighbors are better left undisturbed. In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, the Harrisons were known as the friendly neighbors. With their well-kept lawn and cheerful disposition, they were the kind of family everyone knew and loved. However, when the Parkers moved in next door, the atmosphere shifted. The Parkers were reclusive, rarely leaving their house. Their windows were always drawn, and a strange, oppressive energy seemed to radiate from their yard. At first, the Harrisons tried to be welcoming. They invited the Parkers over for dinner, but their invitations were met with silence or awkward excuses. As the days turned into weeks, the Parkers became a source of curiosity and gossip in the neighborhood. People whispered about them at the grocery store, speculating on why they were so withdrawn. One evening, while watering her plants, Claire Harrison noticed a flicker of movement in the Parkers' backyard. Peering through the fence, she caught sight of Mr. Parker standing motionless, staring at the ground. His posture was rigid, as if he were waiting for something or someone. As weeks passed, Claire felt a growing sense of unease. Strange noises began to emanate from the Parkers' home at night, low thuds, muffled voices, and an eerie sound that resembled chanting. Each morning, she would glance out the window to see Mr. Parker, still standing in the yard, his gaze fixed on the Harrisons' house. Concerned, Claire confided in her husband. "David, I think something's wrong with them," she said, her voice trembling. David shrugged it off, dismissing her worries as paranoia. "They're just private people, let them be." But Claire couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over her. One night, unable to sleep, she woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Curiosity piqued, she crept to the window. There, illuminated by the moonlight, stood the Parkers, both of them. They were holding hands, staring directly at the Harrisons' house. Fear gripped her as she backed away from the window, trying to convince herself it was a dream. The next morning, Claire found herself drawn to the Parkers' yard. Something compelled her to investigate, to understand what was happening. As she approached, she noticed strange symbols drawn in the dirt. The air felt charged, heavy with a sense of foreboding. Suddenly, Mr. Parker appeared at her side, his eyes wide and intense. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. Startled, Claire took a step back. "I was just ... Curious, she stmmered ... You don't understand," he replied, glancing over his shoulder. "They're watching, always watching." Puzzled, she asked, "Who's watching?" But before he could answer, Mrs. Parker emerged from the shadows, her expression unsettlingly serene. "It's too late for us. You need to leave this place. They want you." Chilled to the bone, Claire hurried back to her house, heart racing. She told David about the encounter, but he remained skeptical. "They're just eccentric," he said, brushing off her fears. "You're overthinking it." That night, the noises grew louder than ever. The chanting echoed through the air, growing more intense. Claire couldn't take it anymore. She decided to call the police. But when the officers arrived, the Parkers were gone, their house empty and silent. The police left, chalking it up to a prank. As days turned into weeks, the Harrisons tried to resume their normal lives, but the oppressive atmosphere lingered. The Parkers were still missing, and the neighborhood felt off-kilter. Then, one evening, Claire found a note slipped under her door. It was written in a shaky hand, "Help us. They're coming for you next." Fear washed over her as she raced to tell David. But when she turned around, she saw the Parkers standing at the end of the street. their faces pale and drawn. They stared at her, their eyes filled with a haunting mix of desperation and warning. In a panic, Claire grabbed David and the kids, urging them to pack their bags. They needed to leave immediately. Just as they were about to drive away, the Parkers approached them, their expressions hauntingly calm. "It's not safe," Mr. Parker said. "They've chosen you." Suddenly, the world around them felt suffocating. Shadows loomed, and a chilling wind swept through the neighborhood. David hesitated, unsure of what to do, but Claire was determined. "We can't stay here." As they sped away, Claire glanced back at the Parkers. They stood in the street, unmoving, their faces reflecting a sorrowful resignation. The last thing she saw was Mr. Parker's eyes, wide and pleading, as if he knew what was coming. Months later, the Harrisons found themselves in a new town, trying to rebuild their lives. But the memories of Willow Creek haunted them. They had escaped the Parkers, but whispers of their eerie presence lingered in Claire's mind. Every night, she felt the watchful eyes of unseen beings, as if the darkness had followed them. And in the dead of night, when the wind howled just right, she could almost hear the chanting echoing through the trees, a reminder that some neighbors never truly leave. In the quaint town of Millfield, nestled among the trees and the quaint shops, there was a house that everyone avoided. It was an old Victorian, once vibrant and full of life, but now it stood in disrepair. The paint was peeling, the windows were boarded up, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. The neighbors whispered stories about the occupants, a family known only as the Reeds. The Reeds had moved in quietly, almost under the cover of darkness. No one had seen them come or go, and the children in the neighborhood dared each other to approach the house. Strange sounds often emanated from within, thumps, low murmurs, and an occasional shriek that sent shivers down the spines of those nearby. One summer evening, a group of teenagers, emboldened by bravado, decided to investigate. They crept through the tall grass, approaching the front porch, where the wood creaked ominously underfoot. The leader of the group, Jake, knocked on the door. To their shock, it swung open, revealing a dimly lit hallway filled with shadows. "Let's go inside," Jake urged, excitement dancing in his eyes. Reluctantly, the others followed, stepping into the musty air of the house. They ventured deeper, their laughter echoing off the walls, but the atmosphere shifted as they moved into the living room. The once grand space was cluttered with old furniture, covered in dust, and the air felt heavy. Suddenly, they heard a sound from the back of the house, a loud crash, followed by an eerie silence. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Probably just a cat," Jake said, though uncertainty crept into his tone. "Let's check it out." As they moved toward the sound, the air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling settled over them. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, which was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, they were met with a scene that would haunt them forever. In the small room, the walls were covered with strange symbols and drawings that seemed to pulse with energy. In the center stood a makeshift altar, surrounded by candles that flickered as if touched by an unseen wind. On the altar lay a collection of object dolls with missing limbs, rusted keys, and what appeared to be animal bones. "Guys, we should get out of here," Sarah urged, her eyes wide with fear. But Jake, driven by curiosity, stepped closer to the altar. Just then, a voice echoed through the room, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Leave, now." Panic surged through the group. They turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The walls began to close in, the symbols glowing ominously. They could hear whispers rising around them, a cacophony of voices chanting in a language they couldn't understand. "Help, let us out," Jake shouted, banging on the door. But the more they fought, the stronger the whispers became. It felt as if the house itself was alive, feeding off their fear. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, Sarah hurled herself against the door. It burst open, and they stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. They didn't stop to look back, racing out of the house and into the night. The next day, they gathered their courage and returned to tell the neighbors about their experience. To their surprise, the neighbors were well aware of the Reeds and their reputation. "They're not just odd, they're dangerous," an elderly woman warned. "No one goes near that house anymore." Over the following weeks, the teens learned more about the Reeds. Rumors circulated that they practiced dark rituals, drawing power from the very essence of fear. The whispers they had heard were said to be the voices of those who had come before, those who had ventured into the house and never returned. Months passed, and the Reeds disappeared as mysteriously as they had arrived. The house on Maple Street remained abandoned, yet the sense of dread lingered in the air. No one dared approach it, and the stories grew, becoming a part of local folklore. Then one night, a group of college students, unaware of the tales, decided to explore the house. As they approached, they could feel a chill in the air, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward them. They entered, laughing at the absurdity of the rumors. But as they ventured deeper, the whispers began anew, low and insistent. The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in a darkness that felt alive. Their laughter quickly faded into screams. To this day, the house on Maple Street stands empty, a haunting reminder of what lurks within. The neighbors know to keep their distance, for the stories have become warnings, and the Reeds are no longer just a name, they are a legend, a chilling echo of the horrors that lie hidden in the shadows. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you have similar stories you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.